Happy St. Patrick's Day. Top of the morning to all of you. And welcome to another episode of Hollywood Kitchen. I enjoy doing episodes, of course, on the huge iconic stars, but I also love to do deep dives into more of the obscure or lesser known stars. And of course, I love the silent era. So today we're going to spend our St. Patrick's Day with Colleen Moore. And I am lucky enough to have her biographer, Jeff Kadori, as my special guest. So, Jeff,
Howdy.
thank you so much for joining me.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Happy St. Patty's Day.
Happy St. Patty's Day. Well, if you met someone who knew absolutely nothing about Colleen Moore, what would you tell them about her? What's the 101?
The 101 is that, and the biggest known fact about her was for a time she was the biggest money making female star in Hollywood until she was replaced in that position by Clara Bow. Very influential. She was the actress who popularized the bobbed haircut and began a national rage of short hair. Lots of articles in lots of magazines talked about as women cut their hair shorter, they become more manly. And as they become more manly, men become more womanly. It was kind of the whole gender thing of the previous century. Hair got longer again when the depression came in, so suddenly everybody forgot about all that. But she was a person who made it popular for lots of young women who had already started coming out of the home because of the Great War to live a life without necessarily being seen as strange or weird or going against the American way. Her flapper image and what she's remembered for, the flapper films, made that possible for a lot of people and also paved the way for actresses like Clara Bow and Joan Crawford and lots of the actresses that are typically thought of paving the path for women to live lives in the world.
Well, the film that basically kicked off the entire flapper craze, as far as I know, is credited with that, is her 1920 film Flaming Youth.
23.
23. Okay, 23, 1923, Flaming
there,
Youth.
there
Okay.
was actually a 1920 film
Othello
called
Thomas, the
the,
flapper.
the Flapper,
Okay.
which kind of introduced it and had the basic elements. Flappers were young women, like I mentioned, who had started working because the men were gone to war, and they worked. So occasionally they drank, occasionally they smoked, they wear makeup. They were those women. And there were no real good images of flappers because anybody who did, there was a woman who decided she was going to be an anthropologist and she went to Africa. She was the flapper student. There were people who would rob gas stations. There were women, they were the flapper robbers. So up until that point, a flapper was a questionable character. Her character in the 1920 film The Flapper with Olive Thomas showed a young woman, I think she's supposed to be 16, trying to be an adult, being perceived as an adult, which is kind of the through line for a lot of Flapper films. The 1923 Colleen Moore Flaming Youth was based on a book by the same title, which was really, really controversial. I mean, her character, she's, I think, about 16, 17, although I don't know that they state the age in the film. The romantic lead is her much older boyfriend, who was also the much younger boyfriend of her mother, who was married. So it was an open marriage, not directly addressed, but the film, when it was made, was kind of an expose of the modern youth, and the studio, to make it a little more acceptable, threw in some comedy, which kind of is why flapper films are almost always seen as comedies. Although originally Flaming Youth was kind of the expose film and controversial. Some of it still exists, and you can see portions of it at the Library of Congress, their film website, for lack of a better word. There are fragments that are still available. What is best known, and you can actually see it in the advertising, are characters dancing in silhouette. They're presumably skinny dipping. One of those characters dancing around was her brother, who was in the film as an extra.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, well, I love the F. Scott Fitzgerald quote, which I will read here. I was
Mhm.
the spark that lit up flaming youth, and Colleen Moore was the torch. What little things we were to have caused all that trouble, by F.
Yeah.
Scott Fitzgerald.
Well, Colleen wasn't really necessarily a little thing at that point.
The big thing.
She had everybody thinks, oh, that's the film that gave her the big break, but she had come to Hollywood and started making films, I think 1917, and I'd say roughly every 2 or 3 years she was discovered. This director discovered her, that director discovered her, and so she was already getting pretty big. But yeah, Flaming Youth, like a rocket. That was the one that really made her the brand Colleen Moore, not just the
Now, since it is St. Patrick's Day, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, there are three non-Irish but labeled as Irish recipes that were attributed to her. What is Colleen Moore's ancestral background?
Well, her mother's side of the family came from Ireland, County Cork. I'm going to say I know I've seen her say that before in print, but I don't know that for a fact. Her mother's maiden name was Kelly. There was a whole Kelly family in Port Huron. 8 aunts, lots of cousins. So she was born. Her mother married a Scottish father, Charles Morrison. She was born Kathleen Morrison, so she's half Scotch, half Irish. The Irish was really advertised because in films, the Irish, yes, exactly, the Irish women were seen as especially untouched by modern society, very old timey and folksy, which is kind of the subversive thing in the casting of the sweet Irish lass Colleen Moore as a flapper. But she was, yes, half Irish, and her grandmother, who was Irish, I think was the one who came over from Ireland, played a big part in her life as she was growing up. Really guided her spiritually as well as actually in person throughout her life and her career.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when deciding what recipe to make, I was kind of surprised that I didn't find more options because considering what a gigantic star she was, there's not a ton of recipes out there attributed to her.
Mm-hmm.
However, there is a cookbook that I have. It's called Favorite Foods of Famous Stars. It's from the early, I think, or mid 30s. It was put out by the Norge Refrigerator Company. When if you had a Norge refrigerator, it was the aristocrat of the kitchen.
No, I would have had a Frigidaire, but that's me.
Let's see. So a few years ago, Janet Klein, my friend and I, we made some Ginger Rogers recipes out of this book, and they turned out really well. So I was actually quite optimistic when I saw the Colleen Moore recipes listed in here.
Can you show that picture of her
I
just a
can
little bit
show this
closer?
picture.
That is not the bob, although the hair is short, there are no bangs. I just thought I'd get that out of the way now. She's known for the bangs and the bob.
It's true.
All right.
Well, the recipe is okay. So these are the ones that are listed in here. The first one is called the Shamrock Salad. Well, basically, it's green peppers stuffed with cream cheese, pimento, olives, and salad dressing. And it
Yeah.
sounds really bad.
Yes, it does.
Second option is County Cork ice cream, which is vanilla ice cream with and served in a sherbet dish with thickly and coarsely chopped peanuts. I have been to Ireland. I've actually been all over the country of Ireland. I have never seen any of these on any menu over there, by the way.
Peanuts as a topping, I can understand. I've seen it in recipes before, but Irish, yeah, I'm not
Yeah,
so sure.
questionable.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the third one is called Irish Delights, and it is basically Jello with 2 cups of sugar, an orange juice, lemon juice, green food coloring. You cut the Jello up in cubes and roll it in powdered sugar.
I'm diabetic and I'm already going into shock.
That sounded pretty bad too. Well, I wrote an email to Jenny Hammerton. She has been blogging and making and videoing celebrity recipes for a long time. She is the original gangster of classic movie celebrity recipes and a very lovely person. Well, I wrote to Jenny and I was like, Jenny, help. I need help. What can I make for Colleen Moore that is edible? And Jenny recommended this book, which I have courtesy of my friend Janet Klein.
Mhm.
It's called Fashions and Food in Beverly Hills, and it's got this lovely Art Deco cover on it. It is also from the 1930s. And there's a Colleen Moore cookie recipe in here. So it does involve a tremendous amount of beating and mixing, which of course makes a lot of noise. So I thought I would make the recipe in advance and
Mhm.
talk about what I did. So you add 1 cup of butter, 1.5 cups of sugar, mix very thoroughly. Add 3 whole eggs, putting in one at a time and beating thoroughly. I want to preface, I used two. My friend Mary Stanford, who consults with me on all of these, she said that if I went with three, it would be a lot thicker and more cake-like. So she said two would be better, which is what I did. And then 3 cups of sifted flour, half package of crushed raisins, 1 cup of walnut meats, sliced small, 1 teaspoon of baking soda dissolved in tablespoon of water. Mix thoroughly, taking in 1 teaspoon at a time. Place evenly about dry, shallow pan. Put whole in a slow oven until brown. Gotta
That's
love
an
vagueness.
awful lot of ingredients, but more palatable.
Yeah, and put in slow oven until brown. I love how there's no temperature, there's no time. These celebrity recipes are always so vague.
Yeah.
I looked up some equivalent recipes and I wound up putting these in the oven for about 12 minutes at about 375.
All right.
Here is the result. They're basically like a La Madeleine cookie, only not shaped like a seashell. They're very, very thick, very dense. I probably should have used more walnuts, but is the result.
All right. Those look like cookies. I'd do one.
Yeah, so these are not bad, and this is way more edible than
Yeah.
these recipes that are totally not Irish and frankly don't even sound edible at all.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, one of the things that we talked about earlier before we started the live cast was, yeah, Colleen didn't do a lot of her own cooking.
I imagine.
Yeah, she came from upper middle class.
Mhm.
She wasn't from a rural background. She didn't have to cook or die. And she wasn't necessarily paying attention in the homemaking skills in school because, as she writes in her book Silent Star, which you've got there we go. She more or less was constantly dreaming about being an actress and actually specifically being a star in Hollywood. So she wasn't necessarily paying attention with the lessons and wasn't a great cook. So recipes that are attributed to her are probably coming from a press agent. So
I figured, I'm sure somebody at Norge basically came up with these. And it's funny because every recipe in this book, they're all cold recipes for the Norge. And it's all the instructions are all chill in the Norge. So I'm sure someone at Norge Refrigeration is behind this.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I would not wouldn't be the least bit surprised. She was very very good at lending her name to products. So she had her own line of cosmetics through the Owl Drug Company, and you can in fact occasionally see like the Colleen Moore fragrance bottle or what have you pop up on eBay. So if people are out there and are looking to do research into Colleen Moore, look for Colleen Moore and Owl Drugs, and you will find stories about how she consulted in this fragrance, which I could actually see being something she would do uh, before it was released with her name. Then actually having ever cooked anything like that. I had just spoke earlier this week with her stepdaughter Judy to let her know that I was going to be doing the podcast, just to confirm. I suspected she didn't cook much, but I didn't want to say for a fact. And she said, "Oh yeah, she didn't cook." One day she had taken in Chicago, well after her film career, Colleen had taken cooking classes. One day, Judy is coming back. She comes to their building. She sees fire engines outside the door of their building. She said to me in her message, she said, "I didn't even have to ask what was happening." And then the doorman said, "Yeah, Colleen set fire to the kitchen." So she did have recipes, and I'm sure she might have done anything that hopefully didn't involve fire or open flames.
No sense in the George Refrigeration Cookbook.
She might have been actually, yeah, some of those recipes she might have had someone make, but no, she had people to do the cooking for her. After film, she moved to Chicago. She was a socialite, and I'm sure she measured cooking abilities versus not wanting to poison the guests or burn down the house, and went
Fair.
over to that end and had someone do her preparations for her. She did have recipes that she kept around the house. I'm sure she made plenty of dishes. She had some favorites, and I see balloons.
Why? I don't know why
Balloons
there's
just went up
popping up
over my
behind me.
screen.
Wait, that is? That's
Did,
weird.
yeah, well, I don't think it was me. I don't know Zoom that well. But anyhow,
I
yeah,
do,
she
but
had
it's
recipes.
never, huh?
I'm assuming it's not my imagination. I could be having a stroke. I don't know.
No, it's not. I don't know why it did that. That's very weird. Um,
It was interesting though.
well,
I was thinking, did I say the magic word? Is Groucho Marx about to come out?
I wish. I love Brown.
Yeah.
So, one thing I want to point out for people watching that maybe haven't seen a Colleen Moore movie, there are at least two on DVD. Now, there's a lot of gray market DVDs out there, but I kind of want to stick with the more, you
Right.
know, officially sanctioned ones. So, I love Why Be Good. I was lucky enough to get to see this at LACMA before the Bing Theater got unfortunately torn down.
Hmm.
And this is a really fun, entertaining flapper comedy.
Yeah.
And this was also just now re-released from the Warner Brothers archive, along with a double feature of Joan Crawford in The Boob.
Hmm.
So I love that it's getting another release.
And that
And
is a very good quality video too, by the way, for anybody out there who's wondering about whether or not they should get it. It's very clean, very clear. I don't know if they did any upscaling or if they added any frames per second, but when I watched it on a digital screen, it looked very clean and clear.
excellent. And
Hmm.
then also, I've been doing some projects with a organization lately called Film Masters, and they have all sorts of DVD releases and videos, and they're very nice people. And they recently released The Scarlet Letter, which was it her last or her second to last
I
film?
believe it was the last released, and what I understand was she said it was the only film that later in her career, it was the only film she did strictly for the paycheck. Her dollhouse was under construction at the time. She wanted to take it on tour for charity purposes to raise money for I don't remember what the exact phrase would have been, but basically crippled children. I'm sure it was for an actual organization. Since there weren't grants at that time, she basically had to foot the bill to transport her fairy dollhouse around. So she did that last film to get money for that tour.
Now,
Um,
this is a really good DVD. And also, Cora Sue Collins, who was in this with her, is still alive and with us and
mhm,
does commentary as well on this. It's got a lot of bonus features, extras, etc. So these two I know of that are available.
yes.
But I've been lucky enough, I saw her film The Power and the Glory with Spencer Tracy at the UCLA Archive.
Hmm.
I've gotten to see Synthetic Sen back at the Rest in Peace Silent Movie Theater, which used to exist. Um, I've seen Orchids and Ermine. I've seen several, but the problem is most of these films are not seeable now,
Right.
correct? Either they're
That's
great
true.
market DVDs or fragments or on YouTube or
A lot of her films didn't survive. A lot of actors say Charlie Chaplin, when he got control of his own films, and so that's why a lot of Chaplin's films exist. Colleen didn't do that, and so she was kind of depending on everyone else to do the preservation. A lot of people will hear the story about how the only existing copy of Flaming Youth got sent to the Museum of Modern Art, and they basically let it deteriorate. It's really a more complicated story than that, but
it's our
exactly. But essentially, that there's politics involved, internal politics, but Yeah, so a lot of her films, they're out there, but a lot of them are yet to be discovered. So one of the films that you didn't mention that's not out on DVD is Her Wild Oat.
I love her Wild Oat. I've seen that twice. I love it.
Hmm. Which still existed mostly intact. I want to say Czechoslovakia, but that's the
Yes.
80s name. It
My
might have
friend
been the
Hugh,
Czech. Yes, the
my
Czech.
friend Hugh Monroe Neely is a preservationist, and he was very involved in bringing this back from the Czech Film Archive to America.
And the main reason why that even happened at all was actually September 11th. Joe Ransky told me this story, and I know he's told this story before. Because September 11th happened, one of his friends was at that archive and asked, "Hey, I'm going to be here for a while. Can you give me some names of some films that I should look for?" And one of them was Her Wild Oat, which once he found the translate, he realized, oh my God, it exists. It's here. That one, most people are only ever going to be able to see on film because if I remember correctly, the rights belong to Warner Brothers. The Warner Brothers bought First National, which was her studio, but it was preserved by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. And so the problem is if the Academy wanted to release it on DVD, they'd have to give all the profits to Warner Brothers. And so it's one of those things you can't see it, but it has to be projected. And so if you're lucky enough to see it in the theater, great. But you're never going to get to see it on DVD. You're probably never going to get to see it on DVD. And there are other films. Ella Cinders, very famous comedy of hers. That one, for strange reasons, even I don't understand. They've been explained to me and it went right over my head. It's now in the public domain, and so in theory, anyone can release a copy. And so during the DVD and CD era, everybody did release a copy. So you could probably still find those very easily on eBay, but they're of varying quality. They're not restored copies of the film. They're prints, either from 16 millimeter or whatever was available.
It just frustrates me that politics and money and corporations prevent so much art from getting out there. I mean, I know it's complicated and everything, but it's just frustrating as someone who just loves the work and just wants to see it.
Well, a lot of it still needs to be found.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, this film, Her Wild Oat, was it was in an archive, but with a foreign language title. So an American researcher, me going there looking for Colleen Moore's films, unless I had a list phonetically with all the symbols and like that, I wouldn't know if I was looking at a copy of Flaming Youth unless it was screened for me. And there are so many films, it would be impossible to screen them all. The Library of Congress has their, I can't remember, it's where they screen orphan films, where
Oh
the
yeah,
frag,
Orphan Film Symposium. I've always wanted to go to that,
yeah.
actually. Sounds
And there's a lot of people who will look and they'll see like just a second of a clip and they'll know, oh, I recognize that background, that set was used. And so unless you could get a group of that people of that caliber to go to all these archives and go around, a lot of these films are going to remain unknown until they can all be released digitally somehow and then identified. So
Oh, I hold out eternal hope that more silent lost films will be found. I mean, they just found part of the Clara Bow short, The Pill Pounder. So
which I'm hoping to
occasionally
see
miracles do happen.
next month. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll see that in San Francisco next
Mhm.
month.
Yeah, me too.
Miracles do happen on occasion.
Oh, yeah.
So
Well, and it's just a matter of eventually them being found, or if nothing else, the films that are out there that are on nitrate being copied over to safety film, even if they're not identified, even if they're not restored. Once in a while, there was somebody who would always say, "Oh gosh, I wish this film would be restored," and I say, "I'd just be happy to have it preserved.
yeah.
Restoration can come later, but we want it to survive."
I feel like we live in a world where you kind of have to take what you can get and be grateful.
Yeah, and there are things coming. When I first published, oh, here comes the time for my plug.
Yes, plug your book, please.
When my first book came out, the Colleen Moore biography, at the back I have a filmography where I list what's known to exist, what's partial, what have you. And I was asked on a couple of titles, don't mention that these are being restored, because we don't want people suddenly going around and looking for other fragments. So when you go to Amazon and buy my book, you will see a filmography that will mention some films, and I believe two of the titles that we mentioned in my book that are listed as non-existent or lost films have since then been found and have been restored. So uh, things will eventually come out. I'm hoping someday someone can do a good restoration of Ella Cinders, because it's out there, it's available. I don't have the wherewithal to do it, but I'm sure someone can clean up a copy, stabilize it, and release something good quality.
And you do see clips of Ella Cinders in the Kevin Brownlow documentary series, Hollywood, The Pioneers.
Yeah, you do see that. And uh, because by that point, that would have been the early 70s, it had been in the public domain for a while. I don't know, I don't remember the quality of what the clip that was shown was, but there probably are better quality existing clips now. And like I said, it's on eBay. You can probably find it. Sellers probably, I want to say Grapevine Video, if they're even still around, I think had a copy of it. It can be found. Another one that I know I bought through, I think, Grapevine, not Lilac Time, although that one there are still copies of Twinkle
By the way,
Town.
it's going to show at the Old Town Music Hall in the next month or so too. So that is a
Yeah.
rare opportunity to see it on a bigger screen.
Another one that I bought from eBay, and there probably are video people around who have it, is Twinkle Toes. And most of these titles that we are mentioning are from First National after Flaming Youth. So when she became really famous. So one of the reasons why these films still exist is thousands of these prints were made and sent out to theaters all over the United States and around the world. So there are films that she made that were smaller productions before she was as famous, which we are less likely to see because there were fewer copies that were sent out. Her comedies were the ones that were most popular. They were the ones most widely circulated. So the ones we are most likely to see in the future will be her comedies. So mostly her flapper films. But since that's what she's mostly associated with, hey, that's great too.
Well, I wanted to bring up one topic that you and I were chatting about earlier before we went live. And that's that when you compare Colleen to her, say, her contemporaries, Clara Bow and Joan Crawford, for example,
Mm-hmm.
she's not as well remembered today. And I was thinking, why isn't that? She was extraordinarily high paid, a terrific, huge star at the time. And by today's standards, most people, except for people like us, don't know who she is.
Right.
And I was thinking, well, first off, she wasn't in any massive scandals that I can
Mm-hmm.
recall. She seemed like a pretty nice person. And also, so many of her films are harder to see and not nearly as
Right.
prevalent as, say, Joan Crawford or Clara. And also, I don't think she had any high profile celebrity marriages or anything like that. I mean, I know she was married to producer John McCormick, but that wasn't like being
Mm-hmm.
married to Gary Cooper, for example, or something.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering if those are some of the reasons that she's not as well remembered.
Those are some of the reasons. And some of the reasons that I would think she is not well remembered are uh, her career. She basically ended her career at the end of the 20s. I forget when her last film was made, but her
33 or 34 for this
34,
one, I
yeah,
think.
probably, yeah. I'm Since I wrote the first book, lots of facts have flown out of my head to make room for the new facts. So I sometimes have to guess at that. Audience members out there, look up what I say, because occasionally I'll get it wrong. I'll admit that. No, but her career, once she decided she was done with film, she was done like with film. So she wanted to retire in about 1927. She wanted to have a domestic life. She wanted to have children, and her husband, John McCormick, didn't. He had this idea that he was the one who created her image, that he'd invented her, and I think he straight up said to her when she told him, "I'm wanting to retire and have kids. You can't have kids. You're a child yourself." Well, she was almost 30 and she wanted to have a family. So when sound came along, she realized, I'm going to basically have to start over. And she'd already gone all the way up to stardom, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to start over and then work her way back up again. She eventually divorced John McCormick. She married 3 other times. Her second and third husband were stockbrokers. And being as her father, she says he was an engineer and he might have had an engineering background, but in his early years, he was a banker. She learned a lot about finances, money, and what have you from her husband. So she is in, say, Chicago. She's more famous for her dollhouse, and she's more famous for being a socialite than she ever was for having been a star. The Chicago Film Festival, I believe she was a co-founder of. If she wasn't actually a co-founder of it, she was one of the people behind getting it started. So uh, once she left film, she had other interests. Everybody else, their careers went further into the talkie era, so that's probably why they're better remembered. Other people had advocates. So Louise Brooks, who a lot of people mistook for her,
Mhm.
at least to me, they thought, oh, didn't she do this film? Oh, no, they just had similar haircuts. Was it James Card was one of the people?
House.
Yes. And so, and plus, Playboy did a,
Hugh Hefner. Yeah, they bankrolled a documentary about Louise Brooks.
yeah. So there were people in the 80s who were in the 80s and the 90s going on who were interested in propelling these individual characters. Colleen was happy being retired, happy having a family life, so wasn't as actively, trying to get her name out there. So part of it was she'd done her time in film. She was ready for another part of her life. If someone did rediscover her, she'd have no problem with it, but she wasn't going to push it. So she had a lot of money. She could have had her own films restored if she wanted to, but she didn't do that. She thought, if people think I'm important enough, they'll do the restorations. Otherwise, me doing it, she was Catholic, that would be prideful. That's my feeling. She didn't want to look like she was boosting her own image. And in fact, later on in her life, if you went and visited her, I never met her. I never learned about her until after she had died. But if I had had the opportunity to go and interview her, I have the feeling most of the interview would have been her asking me questions about my life. She was interested in hearing other people's stories and not telling her own. So,
I always find it interesting when stars are able to have that next chapter because I think there's some stars that the stardom in the movies are all they have. And basically they can't walk away. They can't leave. I mean, look, Betty Davis was working right up until, yeah. But then there's others that can go, you know what? Had the career, kind of over it, ready for something new, and they can just step away, which either choice is perfectly valid, but they can just step away and begin an entirely new chapter of their lives, and they don't seem to really miss or cling to the old one. So I kind of find that interesting.
well, when she married her third husband, Homer Hargrave, I think he was one of the co-founders of Merrill Lynch, and Colleen had already had a good money sense. At Hollywood parties, you could see her talking with some of her friends, but they weren't talking about gossip. They were talking about real estate and investments. Uh, she wrote in Silent Star, and I've actually seen it, that when the Depression came along, she had invested wisely. So she wasn't wiped out like a lot of people were, but she did have some stocks that became worthless. And so she took a big room divider screen and she just pasted stocks that were no longer worth anything onto it as decoration. And it still exists. I've seen it. But yeah, so she had invested wisely. Two of her husbands were stockbrokers. She had money sense. Besides Silent Star, she wrote a book entitled How Women Can Make Money in the Stock Market. And this would have been early 1970s. And before my book was published, I said to myself, okay, I'm going to read that book too, because you never know, she might mention something in there. After like two chapters, I was totally underwater. I could not understand where I was. So yeah, she knew money well, and she was, I believe, the first female partner at Merrill Lynch. And some people have said she was at that time, I'm going to guess 70s and 80s, the richest woman on earth. So yeah, she didn't need to be in film after she left. She had other interests. She had her fairy dollhouse, which is in Chicago, which can still be seen, and just went with those new interests. Yeah, she was one of those people who was able to put the old aside and go on to the new.
It really amazes me too that she had such a business sense because most artists or creative people, and I definitely can relate to this, most of us are really good at like creative stuff, but have absolutely no business, no money sense, or struggle with those issues. And then there's other people like Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, Colleen Moore, who are so brilliant in both areas. You know, they're so savvy artistically and financially, and, you know, in terms of all that other kind of stuff. I'm just amazed by people that are like that. I wish I was.
But she had to be that way. When she first went to Hollywood, her parents told her, "Okay, 6 months, go ahead and get it out of your system, and then when you're done, you can come back. You'll go back to school." So she goes to Hollywood. Her grandmother, Grandma Kelly, goes along with her as chaperone, and she knew if she ended up without work, if she wasn't working, if she couldn't support herself and her grandmother, she'd have to go back to Florida and resume school and all that domestic stuff she had no interest in. So she was pounding the pavement. She was going out and getting work. And when she needed her money, when it was time to get paid, you read her Silent Star. Oh, we were all so innocent, etc., etc. Not so much. One of the things that I found are telegrams that were in the D.W. Griffith collection of papers, where they're constantly saying, Colleen Moore is asking about her pay. She had taken a couple of weeks off to go to Universal and do a film for them, came back after 2 weeks, but they hadn't got her back onto the pay schedule. And I've got tons of telegrams from the collection where a little bit of this business, a little bit about this business. Colleen Moore was in again. She's asking about her pay. I paid her out of pocket myself last week. What are we going to tell her? And basically, the Triangle Film Corporation had owed her $150, and she kept on them until she got her money. So she knew she had she could. Yeah, her family had some money, but she knew she had to, and the advice her grandmother gave her, which you hear it sometimes, but in her case it was true. If they offer you $50 for a movie, ask for 100. If they're only asking you for a 50, they can afford 100, which she did, which was one of the reasons why she was earning thousands of dollars a week when she was at First National.
I
So
heard the salary was up to about 12,500 a week. Is that correct?
something like that. It was even higher, I'm going to say, in 1927. I don't have the exact figures. I've got the exact figures somewhere in my notes, but I couldn't find it exactly. But she was earning a lot of money. She was one of the big makers of money for First National, and eventually that became Warner Brothers. Lilac Time was one of her big super productions. All right, Lilac Time is an important film because First National had just been purchased by the Warner Brothers, and the Warner Brothers had just suddenly made it big with sound film. So Warner Brothers was taking this opportunity to say to all their stars, we're renegotiating all the contracts. We're going to be going sound. Everything goes back to zero, and you're only going to earn what we think you can make for us when we get the sound. They went to Colleen and John, her husband, John McCormick, and they said with Lilac Time that had been in pre-production and was about to go into production, we want you to make this a sound film. And they refused. They said, no, this was conceived as a silent film with synchronized sound and music, not dialogue. And that's how we're going to do it. And they kept pushing, no, make it sound, make it sound. And they pushed back and they said, no, trust us, we're doing it this way. What's so important about the film Lilac Time was it was made with a sound on disc music track and sound effects track. They didn't do dialogue because when you have sound on disc, that disc can become unsynchronized with the image that's being projected. You don't want people's lips moving and then 3 minutes later that dialogue coming. Because it was sound on disc with intertitles, that film, Lilac Time, could be shown in any theater in the United States. So if a theater was wired for sound, you got the full effects of sound effects and music and all of that. But if your theater wasn't wired for sound, you could still watch the film. And even if it was a guy on a piano accompanying it, you could still understand what was going on because of the title cards. It was $1 million film. It made back all the money spent on it in less than a month. And that was before it was even released outside of the United States. It just kept making money. It was a huge production. It was the Titanic of its time. And then Warner Brothers said, oh, you know what? Okay, you can do what you want. So whereas a lot of other actors and actresses were basically being screwed by the Warner Brothers because the Warner Brothers were saying, we don't know how much of a paycheck you're going to make for us. Colleen's film had just busted all the projections and was just getting bigger and bigger. So, and if you do ever go watch that film, pay attention.
Yeah.
Well, what you'll do is you'll see there's hopefully it's not a spoiler. At the end, Colleen is looking for her love, Gary Cooper, who's in a hospital. He's about to be transported off somewhere. She's the farm girl. She's desperate to find him. She knows he's somewhere. And so Colleen cups her hands around her lips and shouts. Now you see his name appear. You know she's shouting his name. And then the film cuts to horses galloping by. So it's a loud noise. If you're hearing it, it's a loud noise. If you're seeing it, you know it's supposed to be a loud noise. She tries it again. And so every time she shouts, it cuts away to something really loud. You know by looking at it, it's horses, it's soldiers marching by, it's cannons firing. So you know he's nearby. He's like right around the corner, wherever he is. But he can't hear her. So that bit of tension works both as sound and as a silent. That was the genius of that they were able to ride right in between sound and silent. So it works both ways. That's why you could still see it these days and it's still shown. And it doesn't require a sound track as such because it was made to work either way.
To me, Lilac Time has a lot of similarities to The Big Parade and also to Wings. It's kind of definitely got a lot of elements of both those films in it.
Wings, in fact, actually shared a stunt pilot whose specialty was in crashing airplanes for films. he had I don't remember which order of the films it was, but I think he'd crashed an airplane for Wings, broken, I don't want to say his back, but broke something really bad in his body. But he was tough as nails. And then he went and he did the same thing for the other film. So, yeah, they also shared some staff in that way.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
See if any of our viewers are asking any questions here.
Please ask questions.
Yeah, Jeff was happy to answer them. Let's see. Leslie Apple is saying, my mother had Nord refrigerators, and she told me they all came with cookbooks that she inherited, along with a nested bowl of Nord Pyrex mixing bowls.
Ooh.
Oh my gosh, that's really cool. Leslie, if you have any more celebrity recipes in those Nord cookbooks, let me know because I would love to see that.
And I'll be right back in just one second.
Gary Songer is saying, so many appliances used to come with cookbooks. That is true. Wish they still did today. Let's see. Anna, Benjamin, Mom, thank you for watching. Okay, we don't have any questions rolling in, but I love talking about Colleen Moore, so I enjoy doing this regardless. But she's so much fun to watch. And she still comes across really well even today. Like I would argue, there's some stars that don't translate to the modern era quite as well. She really does. Like I think if you showed Why Be Good to like a group of young women today or teenagers, they'd probably really enjoy it, I think.
She was not afraid to make herself look silly. She was not afraid to get dirty. So she didn't have an overly glamorous image. So
She's more relatable than say Garbo, for example.
in the film that I just mentioned, which escaped from my head, that's in the public domain, Ella Cinders, there we go. That's a film where she gets powder thrown in her face, she gets pasted over, she gets knocked on her ass, she's not afraid to look silly. Not quite the female Charlie Chaplin, but she did have great comic timing, and that was actually a skill she had to acquire. And so for those people out there who can ever find her older films, she did films for Christie comedies, and you can see if you watch them in order, she's kind of not sure what to do with herself. Mainly her role is to be the pretty girl while action goes around her, and she learns with each film and she's a little more involved. She had read that the great dramatic actresses had comic training, and so she jumped from her original damsel in distress roles into comedy, and then into again dramatic roles before she went to First National. And even when she was at First National, her flapper roles, which were all typically comedies, were interspersed with more serious roles. So of the serious roles she's remembered for now, So Big is one of them, the adaptation of the novel by Edna Ferber. How I can remember her name and not remember Ella Cinders a minute ago, I don't know, but that's just the way my brain works. Even at First National, she jumped from comedy to serious to comedy to serious. They interspersed them because they knew they didn't want the public to grow weary of her flapper films. But yeah, she was not afraid to look bad. She was a hard worker too. One of the things that I point out in my book is Charlie Chaplin. His contract was to make one really big film a year. Harold Lloyd, one really big film a year. Colleen Moore, four really big films a year with 2 weeks break in between them, which was in a way fortunate for her because unlike the men, she had a weight clause in all her contracts. I don't remember what the exact figure is, but if she went over 120 pounds, if that was the exact weight, she could be fired just like that. But she was always working, so it was never a problem with her. She was always a thin woman, and she never had an opportunity to stop. 1927, her husband decides to break with the studio. So there was a couple of weeks where she actually didn't have to do anything. But then a new contract is signed. They have to finish a film right away. And that's where Her Wild Oat comes in. I don't remember. It took maybe 2 weeks for them to do that film in its entirety. But they got it done really fast. And it's a great comic film.
And it's also shot partially at the Hotel del Coronado in San Diego. So if you've ever been down there, you will recognize it if you see Her Wild Oat.
And it's set in New York, and that's supposed to be in upstate New York with all the palm trees. So yes, um, she never stopped working. She was a dynamo. She just always went. And then, like I said, after film, she threw herself into having a family life. She married Homer Hargrave, and she ended up with two stepchildren. Homer Jr., Buzzy was what they called him, and Judy, who I actually emailed the other day, and she threw herself into being a mother. And the dollhouse, which came before Homer, before the third marriage, she threw herself into that. That dollhouse you can still see. She threw, I don't remember if it was a diamond brooch or what, but there's some diamond studded piece of jewelry that she had, and she thought if you turn it upside down and put it on legs with it, it would be a great miniature chair. And so that's in her dollhouse. And her dollhouse, she's a storyteller. So her dollhouse, I don't know all the great details about it, but I'm sure each room has a story behind it. The one thing I do know is that there's a grand staircase in her dollhouse, but it has no rails, no handrails, because it's the fairy dollhouse. Fairies have wings. If they fall off the stairs, they don't need rails. Of course, that begs the question, why do they need stairs? But hey, the stairs look great. So yeah, why argue with it?
Question for you too.
Yes.
Oftentimes when I have read Silent Star's autobiographies, they are to be taken often with a grain of salt because many of them are sort of self-mythologizing or they kind of spin the truth according to them. And it's really kind of hard to figure out what's real, what's not, what's truth, what's not. Now,
Mm-hmm.
in this book, where do you feel that Colleen's story kind of diverges from what really happened to her? Because again, I've read this and you read some things going, okay, well, if that's the way it was. But, again, you question whether or not this is all entirely accurate.
There are lots of little points. One example that I can think of is she writes about the European. She goes to Europe. She went to Europe. The European tour for the release of Flaming Youth. In fact, it was more than a year, I think. Afterwards, it was for the release of So Big that
Wow.
she was there for that. So she wrote it in I think 68. So we're talking about 40 years after all these things happened. And the impression that I have is that she mostly wrote down passages and notes. And Adela Rogers St. John's, one of her friends who was a columnist, was the one who kind of put it together for her. She had a tendency to invent things. So in Silent Star, Colleen writes about the time she's trying a swimsuit on and looking in the mirror because she's trying to get a job either at Christie Comedies, which had its bathing beauties, or with Max Sennett, who has his bathing beauties. And supposedly Grandma Kelly comes in, sees her looking in a bathing suit in the mirror, and says, no granddaughter of mine is going to dress like that in a film, or I'm going to yank you back to Florida so fast your head will spin. All right, great little story. And then about 2 or 3 years later, when Adela Rogers St. John's writes her own story, Hollywood as I Know It, I don't remember what the title of it was, the exact same story, only she's in the room with Colleen when that happens. So how much of Colleen's stories were elaborated on by Adela Rogers St. John's that didn't happen? I don't know. She conflates a lot of things together. So, like I said, Flaming Youth and Europe. She wasn't there for Flaming Youth, but it was about the same time. So I have a feeling what happened was that she did a lot of note taking, wrote a lot of notes, and it was put together by her friend. And if I recall correctly, and I can't think of any examples or page numbers that I can give you, occasionally on the photograph captions, it'll say me and so in this picture. And then occasionally it will say Colleen and so in these pictures. So it wasn't necessarily Colleen writing all the photo captions as well.
Yeah,
So
Adela St. John's, I mean, with all due respect, she is really not a reliable source. She was sort of the embodiment of the phrase, never let the truth interfere with a good story.
yes, yes.
That
And
was
in
very much
fact,
what.
when Kevin Brownlow and his crew had gone to visit Colleen and to interview her. When they arrived in Templeton, was it Templeton? I forget. They ran into Adela Rogers St. John's, who said, "Oh, you're going to meet Colleen? I'll drive you guys up there." And so they all go up there. And then after she leaves, "Oh, you met Adela. She's the nicest woman. She's nuts, right?" Or words to that effect. I don't know that she actually said she's nuts, but it was kind of the unacknowledged fact that a lot of things that she wrote about were invention. One of her stories is how all the Hollywood actors and actresses went from Los Angeles to New York on a train so they could all have their voices tested. which would have been really stupid because if that train had crashed into another train, boom, there goes the Hollywood industry. They all did it separately, but it doesn't sound as good if it's individual people going back. So yeah, she had a tendency to invent some things.
Now, if you read this, and it is an enjoyable read, just take
Oh
some of
yeah.
it with a grain of salt.
I had a fear when I started writing my book that it was just going to be the annotated version of Silent Star, and then I realized, oh, okay, this date is wrong, this is off, and it's more just misremembered things or combining two things together. I'm sure in her memory, uh, I have a feeling her birth date is a birth year is a big subject of controversy. She said she was born in 1901. Most of the records that I've found say 1899. I spoke to her stepson, Homer Jr., on the phone once before he had died, and he said his father had told him that Colleen had been born in 1898, which is yet another date. I think what may have happened is in Silent Star, she says she was born in 1901. And so when that book was published, she decided, okay, that's just what I'm going with from now on. Lots of people interviewed her between 68 and 88 when she died. And a lot of people would ask the same questions. And I don't know that she necessarily gave the same answers word for word, but the answers didn't change very much from person to person over the years. And one of the things memory experts will tell you is every time you tell a story, you change it a little bit. Every time I tell a story, it goes from, yeah, I remember I found $5 on the street. And the next time I tell it, it's $150. So that didn't happen with Colleen. If you're like a cop or a police detective, it's a rehearsed story. So I think what may have happened was after 1968, when the book was published, she just went with the facts that were there. But then I'll also admit the records that I have found are not the best records because, there was a Kathleen Morrison born to Charles and Agnes Morrison in 1899, but the name is misspelled. There's another one where there's a mention of Kathleen Morrison being born in 1899, and the box is checked for it being a boy. So unless I found like a birth certificate with fingerprints on it, which didn't exist, and I had a set of Colleen's fingerprints, I couldn't say for 100% sure, that 1899. It could easily have been 1901. And I go into that in my book just to cover all the bases. I think 1899, but 1901 could be equally valid. This one thing that I know for sure, neither one would have affected her career in any way. She could have been born in 1901 or 1899 and said 1901 because being 2 years younger never hurts in Hollywood, especially when you're a woman and you have to have that perfect skin to get across that vibrant, youthful look, because that was the height of the youth culture in America.
Excellent. Okay, so a question for you too. When you were writing this book,
Mm-hmm.
what revelations or things that what surprised you, if anything, when you were researching and writing this?
Well, I kind of went into how tough she was on people when it came to making sure she got paid and making sure that her career continued. Because she mentions, oh, we were all so innocent, we didn't know what was going on, uh, et cetera, et cetera. Besides these telegrams that I showed you, where every other day she was in the manager's office, say, "What about my money? You owe me." Uh, she worked for William Seelig at Seelig Polyscope, and she'd done two films there, Little Orphan Annie and Hoosier Romance. Little Orphan Annie, which has been restored, and I'll admit it, the world's most boring audio commentary on the film. That aside, both films were by John James Riley, famous poet. She had read the poems before. She felt like she was perfect for the role. She was great in both of those roles. She saw herself as the Riley girl. unfortunately, after Little Orphan Annie, that film production company kind of went under. And there were notes that I had found that she had written to Selig back in Chicago. I think I would be perfect as the Riley girl. Let me know if we're going to be doing any more film. Looking out for her own image. She saw an opportunity to be not necessarily like the Vitagraph girl, but the Riley girl. She knew if she was known as the anything girl, that would heighten her recognition. And so that's one of the reasons why she probably, I don't know, she had fun doing the Flapper films. She was known as the Flapper girl. She was known for her haircut. I was surprised at how conscious she was of her own image and how well she was able to exploit her own image to keep her visibility up.
So what happy that she lets on.
It's something I should also mention. She never had an agent that I know of. So until she married John McCormick, all the films she got because she was going into the office with a roll of film under her own hand and selling herself. You don't get that from her book. But yeah, she had to sell herself a lot. She had to pound the bricks a lot. And she did a lot of work on her own career. She had a lucky break, but she ran with it. I talk a lot. I'm going to take a drink.
That's okay. No, but like I said, she's a lot more savvy than she lets on in her descriptions of herself. She sounds like an incredibly intelligent, self-aware woman who knows exactly what she wants.
And that's the sort of thing that she wouldn't necessarily point out to somebody in conversation. I had to work really hard. That would, again, sound like a prideful thing to say. She wouldn't mind me saying it, but it's not something she'd go out of her way to point out. She might point out how difficult a shoot might have been, but she wouldn't necessarily tell you, but it was my decision for my little production group in First National to go do it on location.
Well, I think too, and throughout time, ambition has been seen as like a negative trait in women, which that doesn't make sense to me. Why can't you be ambitious? It's perfectly fine. So
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I'm sure that she probably downplayed her ambition maybe for that reason as well.
Yeah, she definitely downplayed her ambition. Um, one great resource that I had, it's a great resource out there for people. And we should talk a little bit about also book research. Is the First National archives that are in the God, I'm blanking on the archive. It's in Los Angeles. It's the First National papers, telegrams, telegraphs, letters, and that I found so many telegrams. So it's great reading the back and forth. John McCormick, her husband, would send a telegram to Colleen, his wife, but address them Mrs. Colleen Moore McCormick, and go into all sorts of details. Yeah, and she did. It would be easy to assume that her husband was the one who made all the decisions, but no, she did make a lot of her own decisions. 1927, a contract was about to be renewed, and one of the provisos in the contract was, "This is only for Colleen. We are letting John McCormick go." I believe John McCormick was a bipolar, had a bipolar disorder, and so he was self-medicating by drinking. But at that time, it was only known that he was a drunk. So, a couple of weeks, he was a genius. Constantly had these great ideas. He was valuable enough that I don't think he ever got fired from his position at First National. But then he'd go over, things would get dark, he'd start drinking, he'd disappear for weeks on end. So contract was going to be renewed, but with the proviso that John's not included. John said, okay, we're leaving. Colleen, she's married to him, she's a good Catholic, she feels obligated to go along with him. The studio heads go to Colleen in her bungalow, and then she did have her own bungalow at what is now the Warner Brothers lot, and there is an effort to have it named for her. I don't know where that stands now. They go to her, and they ask her, and she explains why she doesn't accept this next. She was going to be making what became Smiling Irish Eyes, and that was going to be directed by her friend. But then they left. But she had her own reasons. John wasn't in the room. She wasn't nodding. She had reasons for not liking the film, and so yeah, she gives the idea that she just kind of went with the flow. That her husband made a lot of the decisions. Her husband may have made a lot of the final decisions, but she did have a lot of say in what she did. So Big was a film completely opposite suddenly Flaming Youth, which was hugely successful. I'm sure John wanted to make nothing but flapper type films. She wanted to do the serious film. And I guess that eventually dragged him along and the studio into realizing, okay, we can't do all comedies. People would get tired of it. So she did have a lot of say in the shaping of her own career.
Excellent.
Yes.
All right. Now, let me see if we have any more questions rolling in. Is there anything? Let's see.
I do eventually stop talking. People can get a word in edgewise.
That's okay. Hey, let's see. Gary Songer, hello, Gary. He's asking, did Colleen have a favorite film of hers?
I know she was really proud of having done So Big because it was very against what would become her type. And a lot of people hated her being cast in it because she was this very modern figure all of a sudden. But in So Big, she is a very old, not necessarily old fashioned type of character, but very opposite to type. People hated the idea. They loved the book, but they hated Colleen Moore's casting. And at the end, people said, oh, you know what? She's pretty good in that film. So she was proud, I think, of that one because her performance was enough to win over fans. And I know she was proud of Lilac Time because it was this huge gamble and it paid off right away. Um, I'm sure she had other films that she liked, but none of them really popped to mind. She could probably point to any individual film I could list and say, oh, I'm so proud of this or that aspect of it.
Leslie Apple is saying, can you tell us anything about Colleen and Jean Harlow? Didn't they know each other?
She knew a lot of people. She went to a lot of the Hollywood parties. She didn't drink, but she did go to the parties. It was very important to network. And I may have come across things about her and Jean Harlow. Oh, wait, Jean Harlow? Okay, I believe she was an extra in the restored film on DVD that she showed up. Uh,
Why be good?
Why be good? I was hoping I would come up. I believe she's an extra in that film. I could be wrong about this. It might have been the other film, Synthetic Sin. She's an extra. She's in a dancing scene in the background. And my understanding was the reason why she was cast in that role is because she didn't wear underwear. I could be wrong about that, but that is how I seem to remember the story. That might be actually saying more about my imagination than any
Well,
real.
I also had read somewhere that Colleen Moore knew Paul Byrne, who was Jean Harlow's second husband.
She knew everybody.
It was a smaller town back then too, probably.
But
So
at that time when she started in film, it wasn't Hollywood yet. It was the film colony. The motion picture business was based in New York and Chicago, and that was just the colony of actors who were in California. So yeah, oh yeah, definitely was a much smaller community. She knew again a name I'm going to blank on, Mary Miles Minter. She went on a double date with Mary Miles Minter, and I don't remember who their dates were, but I was surprised to find that out about Colleen because Mary Miles Minter and that whole that whole again controversy is what we were talking about. I was surprised that Colleen not only knew her as she knew a lot of people, but that she'd been on a double date with Mary Miles Minter. So kind of like Colleen and her date had been the cover for whoever Mary Miles Minter was going out with, so that way the mother didn't find out. That one surprised me.
Anna Wong, hey Anna, she's saying, how did you first become interested in Colleen Moore?
All right, so I have a friend who at that time had gotten a fairly short haircut. You know what? Hold on for just a no, I'm not going to show you the picture. I don't want to embarrass her. I have a friend, and she had gotten a haircut that was kind of like the Colleen Moore haircut. Not as short, but she had bangs, and she's never had bangs before. And people would tell her she looks like Louise Brooks. Louise Brooks being famous because of the whole 80s thing. And so I had gone to a library and looked, and I came across a picture, not of Louise Brooks, but of Colleen Moore. And I go, she looks more like, kind of not necessarily like Colleen Moore, but more like this. And then I looked around and I found absolutely nothing, very little on Colleen Moore, a couple of pictures and a couple of books, but no books about her. So that led me to create the Colleen Moore Project, my website, which I did retire back a month ago. It may come back someday, but we'll have to see. And then after the Colleen Moore Project got big enough where I had amassed enough information, I decided, okay, time to write a book. And that led once again to my book available through Amazon.
There you go. And also, I heard about Colleen Moore because I heard she has two different colored eyes. I have two different colored eyes as well. So I was intrigued by that because it's kind of a rare thing and you don't hear about that many people having it. So that intrigued me. And then when I first moved to Los Angeles, I would go to the Rest in Peace Silent Movie Theater on Fairfax. I'm very angry at the people who've destroyed that beautiful place. But anyway,
Yeah.
and there was a big picture of Colleen Moore on the wall. And I used to just stare at it in fascination. And then luckily, I wound up getting to see a lot of her films there and just fell in love with her, really.
Yeah. Well, if you ever get the chance to see Little Orphan Annie, there is a picture of her in close up, and I think it's used in a lot of the modern publicity of the film, where she's looking straight on, and it's vignetted around. And if you look, you can see as one slightly darker than the other. One of the conditions before she could start working on film was she had to go from her home in Tampa, Florida, up to the SNA studio in Chicago. She had to be film tested to see that her eyes would look close enough in color and not be distracting. And then once it was discovered that, yes, they look close enough in color, it won't be too distracting. Then she went from Chicago to Los Angeles, and that was the beginning of her film career.
She had a point though, because when you have two different colored eyes, if you're not lit properly or photographed properly, either one looks a lot bigger than the other or they look crooked. I remember getting my high school senior picture made and I was instructing the photographer on how to light me. And he just looked at me like, you punk 17-year-old. But I was like, no, it'll one eye look so much bigger than the other. Like because it's true.
And I think Colleen had her own lighting guy at First
Good.
National. First National, each of the major personalities had their own crews basically and their own equipment. And so they knew, you read in a magazine, magazines either made a point of saying Colleen this weight, brown hair. She actually had dark red hair, and they would usually say brown eyes. Occasionally, they'd say two different color eyes, but a lot of the times they were saying brown eyes because you'd only see one apparent color of eye in her pictures on film.
And I meant to show you, while I don't have tons of movie memorabilia, I do have, of course, this book, Silent Star, and it is autographed by Colleen Moore in the front.
Oh yeah,
Found it on eBay. And oddly enough, in this book was an autographed photo of Colleen Moore.
now she at some point, I'm going to say she had about 8 secretaries working for her who to varying degrees could do her signature. Some of them were really unconvincing because she had that much volume of mail. And even up until she died, and for years after she had died, Judy, her stepdaughter, would still receive mail for Colleen and would still send them, I'm guessing, a stash of photographs with the signature on there. So she kept getting letters for quite a while after she had died. She was very generous with her time. So if you went and you found her somewhere and you happened to be carrying that book on you, she'd be happy to autograph it. It wasn't $5 per autograph. She'd just go ahead and autograph it for you.
Well, I've never been to Chicago except the airport, but I would love to go someday and see Colleen Moore's fairy tale house that's there.
I've never been there either, but I'd love to see it too. She lived in Chicago. Uh, she spent her summers in Chicago during her teens, and one of the things that might have happened, I haven't found proof of it, is that she may have been a background extra in some of the SNA studio productions there in Chicago. So she may have started in film before she arrived in Los Angeles. I think it was David Keene who told me that there is an actress who plays a maid in the Prince of Graustark, however it's pronounced, who's the spitting image of Colleen. I've never seen the film, so I couldn't say. And other people have said there's a bunch of maids, but one of them does kind of look like Colleen. So that may have been one film she was in, but that seems more like less like a background extra and more like an actual part. She occasionally said she started in Chicago, but she usually said that to Chicago papers. So maybe not.
All right. Well, I don't see any more questions on the Facebook page, but if any more roll in, would you be willing to go there and answer them?
The Facebook page?
Yeah, mine. The video is on.
Oh, no problem. There's a Colleen Moore Appreciation Society on Facebook, and every so often someone will make a comment on this picture that goes up. And of course, I have to get my word in because I'm the expert. And I'll say, my understanding is X, Y, and Z. And again, I'll say, I could be wrong. I'm more than happy to have people correct me. In fact, one of my goals for writing the book was hoping that someone does the next book and does a better job than me. As it was mostly written before Google Books existed, before the Internet Archive existed. If I was writing the book now, it would be twice as thick and no one would publish it. Do research and see if I'm actually telling you everything correctly, because I'll admit I could be wrong.
Well, if any of you are watching this episode, I really hope that you will seek out some Colleen Moore films because, again, I think by today's standards, she definitely is kind of one of the unsung silent stars, and she's absolutely delightful. She's so fun to watch, and I hope that many of you will discover her.
Oh, I do too. She is great. She's fun to watch. She had a great sense of humor in real life, and it comes across in her films. Fortunately, a lot of her best films were with First National, which is why most of her best films still exist. I recommend, if you ever get the opportunity to see it, if it ever comes out, Broken Chains is a film that she did probably about 2 years before her first national time. Not just a dramatic role, a melodramatic role. And she sells it. So if the Colleen Moore you know is the Colleen Moore with the bobbed hair and fun, oh no, she sells it as the really put upon heroine. So yeah, if you get the opportunity to see her more obscure films, seek them out. They're also really good.
Okay, one more question before we go.
Okay.
Kevin DB is saying, what is the truth behind the Clara Bow and Colleen Moore rivalry?
Someone who watched Babylon. The truth, I do not know. What I understand is, and I'll give you my opinion, in Painted People, at the time it was being produced, it was Swamp Angels. Clara Bow, I think, played the sister of Colleen Moore's character. Clara Bow would say that she thought she should have more close-ups, that Colleen was hugging was hogging the camera, hogging all the close-ups. Reshoots needed to be done, and she decided to get her revenge by having what do you call it when you have a deviated septum? Mm-hmm. She had work done on her nose, so they told her Monday you need to come back for reshoots. Monday she came back, bandage on her nose, face swollen. They just basically said, "Oh, you're fired. You're out of here." Now, what the truth is I don't know. Colleen, like I said, has always been very generous in life. Later on, when she became famous, she was happy to give breaks to the people who were famous and suddenly weren't. Uh, she was happy to step aside and let other people shine. So I tend to believe Colleen's story that maybe Clara was more than what was called for. But obviously, I wasn't around at the time, so that would just be my opinion. What was the truth of it?
Who knows? But I recommend the Clara Bow book, Running Wild by David Sten. That's an excellent book.
Mm-hmm. I think I've read that one. Yeah.
Okay, and Tabitha, George, one more question. Coming in late. Wasn't she the godmother of one of Ronald Reagan's daughters? If so, how did that come about?
I believe she was. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and say she was. How did it come about? Uh, in Chicago, Colleen was a socialite. She was a Republican of the old school. So I believe she was a Nixon supporter, but I have also seen pictures of her swapping books with JFK. I'm just guessing it was Ronald Reagan. You know, he was an actor, and just besides the Hollywood connection, it just came about because anyway, at one point I was given a photograph, a color photocopy of a photograph that came by mail. This is before the internet, of Colleen and another woman. Colleen, yes, Colleen in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. When I had the opportunity to visit Colleen's stepdaughter, I say, all right, so I see Colleen here. Who's this? And there was company over, and they passed it around. I think it's Nancy. I think it's Nancy. And I go, Nancy who? And they go, Nancy Reagan. And I'm like, whoa, brush with fame. Another thing that surprised me was how many famous people outside of film that Colleen eventually met. I think they just knew each other. And Colleen was as likable in real life as she was in her films. So if you met her, you'd want her to be godmother to your kid.
Why not?
Yeah, why not?
Well, I think that wraps it up for us today. But
Right.
thank you to everybody who watched. Thank you, Jeff, for sharing your insights and
I do
knowledge.
have one quick little thing to say. You can see a bike behind me in the background. Every year, I do a bike ride to raise funds to fight multiple sclerosis. I'm doing that again this year. The MS Ride Waves to Wine 2024. I'd love it if people donated and looked my name up, but if not, please donate. It's a great cause.
Send me the link and I'll post it along with this episode.
Do I have it? Do I have it? If this shows, oh, I see reflection, that little QR code might take you to the donation page.
Okay.
But don't donate to me, donate to fight multiple sclerosis.
All right. And thank you again to Jenny Hammerton in England of Silver Screen Suppers for referring me to this recipe. Thank you, Jeff, for being a great guest.
I'm always happy.
Watching. Mm-hmm. And please stay tuned for more food, fun, and film history from Hollywood Kitchen.
Bye.